have it. They have that manuscript, and they're trying to sell it first off with a just they put a price tag on it. Hopefully, they can sell it, and the money is supposedly earmarked by the heirs to go into different foundations that Jim created, and and if they don't do a pre-sale to a client already, they're gonna put it up for auction at some point. So that's the story
Wow.
at the moment.
Right.
Thank you. It's a shame that AA spent all
How
that
much were
money.
they
to-
asking for
anyway.
it?
3.25, I think.
Wow.
And how
Well,
much
Jim
did
Jim
AA
paid 2.5 for it, $2.5 million. So
Right.
they're looking to get some kind of return on that money, and and of course Christie's takes I don't know what the percentage is now, but it's obscene. They take like 15% of whatever the hell anybody pays, or 20%. So
Mhm.
so they'd
And
have
do
to
you
go to
remember-
3.2 to end up with 2.85 or something. So
Do you remember how much AA spent on legal fees? Do we remember that?
somewhere in the 485,000 range, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you.
Just remind us what the question was. I think I missed it in the recording. What was the question?
The question was, what happens? Jim Mercy died, and he's the last owner of the original manuscript with all the markups, the basis of the book that started it all, that Hazelton did in facsimile. And Jim's stuff is being auctioned off, and Babette wanted to know if I knew anything about what was going on with the original manuscript he owned, because it hasn't showed up on the market yet. But that thing was auctioned twice at Sotheby's and once at Heritage, which is where Jim bought it. And I was involved with both of the Sotheby's things. I wrote the second description of the second time it sold at Sotheby's. I sold
The
it.
catalog. Wow.
They gave me a nice little credit at the bottom.
Mhm.
Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
Nice question, Bob. Now, I think there's one. Eric, is this your first time here, Eric? I see
Yes.
Eric, yes. Just
Joining from Florida.
You're very welcome, Eric. Are you new to writing the big book, or have you come across it? A while ago?
Read it extensively.
So did he pass the entrance questions?
I don't know. What's the entrance question? I didn't hear it with all
You
the chatter.
have.
The question we have on the Facebook page is how many footnotes are in writing the big book. You don't have to answer, Eric. It's just that's on Facebook page. We have a many.
Wait a minute, David. I think Bill should submit the entrance question. I don't think you should.
Well, Bob, I don't think you should. I don't think you should have that authority, Bob. Because you haven't been here in a long time. I think David is directing the show. David is directing.
Will it be a simple
Four.
true and false question, please?
Okay. Yes. Are you an alcoholic? Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you, Eric. Good answer.
August, and to follow that up is August 27, 1990.
All right.
Oh, nice.
Welcome, Eric.
Well, Eric, what we do here just before we get into writing the big book, we're on chapter 10, of course, it's titled The Outline, and we're in late June, I believe. So we're in 1938. So we're going to just say this version for people who still have with the old hallowed ideas, as we call them, and we're trying to get into this new way of looking at that period of time from 1937 to 39. So we use this version to set aside prayer. So God, we use God as you understand it, whatever that is. God, please help me
Help
to
me to set aside
everything
I
I
know.
know.
with an
With an
open
open
mind.
mind.
Grow
Grow
in
understanding and effectiveness. Amen.
Amen.
And what we'll do now is just think of the alcoholics who have yet to find a big book or a solution to alcoholism, rather than and also those who haven't found writing the big book yet. Okay, thank you. Brilliant. We're running a bit late. We have 22 pages to cover. We've got the author Bill Sherberg with us, and we've also got Jim Worley out of AA History Only, and a couple more of us are going to read along with them. And I believe we're going first over to I'm going to just introduce the title, and then we're going up the kit. So I said chapter 10, did I? Chapter 9. Hank. Oh, no, we're not on that, David. We're not on that. Pause the recording. And we're going to have a break at this point. Just you're up.
Okay, the outline, late June 1938. With 2 chapters of the proposed book finally in hand, it was time to find out if this writing experiment would prove to be an effective tool for raising money. Ruth typed up the latest versions of There Is a Solution and Bill's story, and Hank put them together in a, quote, neatly gotten up brochure, end quote. Different from their positions in today's big book.
No, have we lost Kit? I think we've lost Kit now.
She froze.
She froze. Bill, if someone's got the text ready, I don't have it handy here. If someone wants to just jump in and take it on from there, I appreciate it.
Different from their position in today's big book, Bill's story was placed second in the package, in partial fulfillment of the promise made at the end of There Is a Solution that, quote, the next few chapters are personal narratives of several of us, end quote. Hank's promotional brochure was accompanied by a letter of introduction, which included a request for an appointment to discuss in more detail the great success they were having in their work with alcoholics. 2 chapters are mailed to the first prospect. On Friday, June 17th, this tidy presentation was mailed off to their very first prospect, Jeremiah D. McGuire, the president of the Federation Bank and Trust Company in New York City. The initial contact information likely came from Willard Richardson, who knew McGuire not only as a prominent New York banker, but also as a member of the advisory committee for Chase National Bank, popularly known as the Rockefeller Bank. McGuire was genuinely impressed by the materials Bill sent him, and despite his busy schedule, he responded the following Tuesday.
June 21, 1938. Mr. William G. Wilson, Henry G. Parkhurst Incorporated, 11 Hill Street, Newark, New Jersey. Dear Mr. Wilson, I acknowledge your letter of the 17th, transmitting a very interesting brochure which I have not read intently, but such extracts as I have had the opportunity to read prove the document a very interesting one, and I shall take the first opportunity to read it more at length. On my return from the Bankers' Convention, which will be sometime during the coming week, I will try to work out an appointment with you. Meanwhile, with kind regards, I am yours faithfully, Jeremy D. McGuire, President, Federation Bank and Trust Company.
Success! Hank Parkhurst had been right. A small sampling from the proposed book was an outstanding way to get the attention of rich New Yorkers who had an interest in the alcohol problem. McGuire's letter probably arrived in Newark on Wednesday, June 22nd, and Bill's undated response was likely sent out 2 days later on Friday, the 24th.
172 Clinton Street, Brooklyn, New York. Phone Maine 43220. Jeremiah T. McGuire, Federation Bank and Trust Company, New York City, New York. Dear Mr. McGuire, your letter came in the other day and its thoughtful consideration is appreciated. Since forwarding you the first 2 chapters of our book, we have prepared an outline of the remainder, which I think you will be interested to look over. I have just dictated a letter to Dr. Robert Smith of Akron, Ohio. You'll recall him as the man out there who has helped between 60 and 70 others to recover, his own case being an outstanding example. It occurs to me that a copy of this letter, which I am enclosing, may give you a clearer idea of what is going on and how we are progressing. The letter is being written from my home in Brooklyn, so that you now have this address as well as that of our Jersey office. Hoping that I shall see you, Bill.
There are several things worth noting in this letter. First of all, the rather informal signature line attests to the fact that Bill was not a man who was easily intimidated by the rich and the famous. 6 weeks later, he would close another letter to McGuire with a much more formal William G. Wilson, but at this point, the confidence inspired by the banker's warm and enthusiastic response had encouraged him to adopt a decidedly familiar tone. Also of interest is Bill's mention of Dr. Bob Smith as someone McGuire would recall as the person who was doing such outstanding work with alcoholics in Akron. The only source of that information would have been the earlier letter sent to McGuire, providing at least one small glimpse into the contents of the cover letter that accompanied this brochure. Finally, Bill mentions his letter as being written from his home in Brooklyn, which raises the question of who might have done the typing for him. A copy of the letter had just been dictated to Dr. Bob, which was also included, but it is unclear whether that letter had been dictated in Brooklyn, and if so, then by whom, or if it was one of several copies produced earlier in the day or the day before at the office in New Jersey. Adding to this uncertainty is the fact that neither the McGuire letter nor the one to Dr. Bob Smith have a date on them, something that is unexpected from Ruth Hawk with her otherwise consistent professionalism, parenthesis, although the street address error was one she would make again in other letters that do carry her signature as typist at the bottom, close parenthesis. But beyond these intriguing elements, the truly important piece of information contained in this second letter to McGuire is Bill's revelation that during the past week they have prepared an outline for the remainder of the book. This outline provides an early glimpse into exactly how Hank and Bill envisioned the whole book project would come together and what it would contain once finished. The outline is actually the list of chapters Hank had so recently suggested as a key requirement for moving the promotion of the book forward. After discussing his idea with Bill, and this time with Wilson's active encouragement and input, Hank had created a comprehensive outline for the book, one that showed precisely how the two recently completed chapters would fit into the projected whole.
Tom Thatcher's suggested intro to the book proposal.
But Hank Parkhurst wasn't the only one working on promotion materials for the new book during that third week in June. Tom Thatcher, one of Ebby's older brothers, had been to dinner at the Wilsons' house on Thursday, June 16th, where he participated in a long discussion about the book project. Following that conversation, Tom put together a neatly typed sheet with his own suggestions for how the book could most effectively be presented to prospective donors. This document was neither an outline of the book nor a cover letter, but rather a short piece of writing Tom thought might serve as an effective introduction to the two chapters that followed. Thatcher had been invited to dinner because his youngest brother, Ebby, had just returned to New York, expressing a serious desire to quit drinking again, and Bill Wilson, in his efforts to muster whatever support he could for the friend who had helped him get sober, had suggested Tom join them for dinner to lend some fraternal encouragement. Ebby Thatcher had originally sobered up and given his surrender, quote unquote, on November the 1st, 1934, and then a few weeks later carried his message of recovery to Bill Wilson. But in April 1937, he fell off the wagon, and 2 months later found himself in Towns Hospital trying to get off the booze one more time. At first, Ebby's efforts were successful, but 1 month later, when he left the protective arms of the New York Fellowship and returned to his job in Albany, he almost immediately started drinking again, this time heavily and continuously, and he went on doing so for most of the next year. By mid-June 1938, alcohol had once more brought him to his knees, and he was desperate to stop. Whenever his drinking overwhelmed him, Ebby turned to the one man he knew he could always count on for help, arriving at the Wilson household on June 14th, just in time to make an appearance at the Tuesday night meeting. Given the contrast between Ebby's sudden reappearance, announcing his desire to get sober again, and Hank's report that Jim Burwell was out drinking again, it must have made for a very inspiring meeting that night in Brooklyn.
Unlike Burwell, Ebby Thatcher had not only enthusiastically embraced the religious solution, he was also the man who had first brought that solution to Bill Wilson. Given this uniquely central position within the fellowship story, and fueled by Bill's ever-vigilant concern, Ebby received generous support from the New York members, including an invitation from one of its most sober members to spend the entire summer on his farm in Maryland. As Ebby tells it,
in 1938, I came down and spent some time with Bill. During my visit, Fitzhugh Mayo from Maryland came also to visit Bill, and he suggested that I return to Cumberstone, Maryland, where he lived, and spend some time with him, and we could have a good time together working around the place where Fitz had done most of his drinking. So I went down and met his wife, daughters, and son. He and Bill were moving about the country a great deal. The idea of the book was beginning to bud, and I was left with the family there. I had a lovely summer.
Before Abby left for Maryland, Lois prepared him a special home-cooked meal, and his brother Tom was invited to join them. Thomas Thatcher, 12 years older than Abby, had attended Princeton University, had been the vice president and general manager of the family business before its collapse in 1922, and was currently an investment broker with an office located in Manhattan. Tom was well known to the Wilsons. He and his wife even attended Bill and Lois's New Year's Eve party the previous December. Lois's dinner was held on the night before Bill mailed their first solicitation package to McGuire, and from Tom's enthusiastic response, it seems clear that the main topic of the conversation that evening was the best way to sell the idea of the proposed book to prospective donors. Tom felt a general one-page introduction was needed to immediately capture the reader's attention and draw him into the 2 chapters that followed in the brochure. A day or 2 after the dinner, he sent Bill a typed 1-page letter containing his, quote, hurried suggestions along the lines we talked, end quote, of the best way to properly introduce the 2 new chapters. Tom begins his proposal with a short handwritten disclaimer across the top of the page, noting that, quote, the suggested title and signatures are merely thoughts that occurred, and like the rest of the outline below, may not fit the picture at all, end quote. Underneath this, the typed introduction is organized under 5 section headings, each followed by a short body of text, parentheses, which makes liberal use of capital letters, end parentheses, creating a succinct and persuasive point about the importance and the worthiness of the book project.
Now, Kit has just texted me. She's unable to get on. Her internet connection has gone down, so I'll just read in for her. So the first section is entitled simply, quote unquote, alcoholism, capitalized. And Tom's lead sentence quotes the observation made by Dr. Young that opens, quote, there is a solution, end quote. I have never seen one single case in which alcohol-mindedness was established in the sense you have it, that ever recovered, and that's capitalized, that ever recovered, end quote. Tom follows this with the claim that this astute evaluation applies to just one individual, but to, quote, several hundred thousands of our fellow citizens, end quote, and, quote, will soon be applicable to 500,000 more, end quote. And of course, there's footnotes there that we're not reading this time around, but you can get them in the text. There's 416 of them, and there's 1,500 endnotes. In the incurable is capitalized section, which comes next, he notes that 3 years earlier, an unnamed alcoholic had, quote, found a haven of self-control, end quote, and then discovered an approach that allowed him to pass this on to others, thereby creating, quote, a circle of self-control and right living, end quote, for 100 men of, quote, of every faith is capitalized and creed is capitalized, end quote, who, quote, have been returned to society as useful members, end quote. The third header, quote unquote, anonymous, and that's capitalized, describes these men as driven by a simple Christian spirit and devoted to just one, quote, common purpose. And this is capitalized, to help their fellow man, end quote. Each of them is deeply committed to helping their fallen brethren attain a life of sober usefulness, and they do this by following a, quote, definite procedure, end quote, that had been developed by trial and error, and which has produced, quote, truly remarkable results, end quote. The next to last section proclaims, quote, each man is writing a brief outline of his life, end quote, and that these will be published in a book entitled, quote, 100 Men by, note, Victors Anonymous, that's capitalized, Victors Anonymous, end quote. That volume will also present concrete information about the disease of alcoholism and emphasize the benefits of psychoanalysis and medical treatment for treating the illness.
Tom entitles his 5th and final section, quote unquote, program, and it is the longest of them all. Here he emphasizes the dire need for a volume of this kind, claiming, quote, "Nothing like this has ever been done before," close quote. Such a book, he says, is surely needed and would almost certainly be a bestseller, but it will require outside financial assistance if it is ever to be completed and brought to market. Regarding that large projected sale, he notes all profits would be, quote, "turned over to a," capital letters, "foundation that will be dedicated to the perpetuation of," capital letters, "self-control and the," capital letters, "right method of living," close quotes. The entire piece is then signed at the bottom by, quote, capital letters, Victors Anonymous, close quote.
Tom Thatcher's unique take on the book.
Tom Thatcher's one-page introduction is remarkably well written for something that was put together so quickly. It's packed with a large amount of well-organized, concise information, making cogent arguments using pithy sentences and effective language. But whether or not it is a completely accurate reflection of the discussion at dinner that night is another matter entirely. Tom admits that what he has written, quote, "may not fit the picture at all," end quote. And that sounds like an astute assessment, especially if one focuses on the two prominent references to self-control as the key to recovery. Parenthesis. It is hard to imagine Bill Wilson invoking self-control as a primary path to sobriety. Close parenthesis. Nor does Thatcher mention religion in any explicit way other than to note that these 100 men operate with a simple Christian spirit and represent every faith and creed. Instead, he emphasizes the disease concept of alcoholism and touts the benefits of psychoanalysis and medical treatment as critical to the solution. It's unlikely these were the exact points Bill Wilson was trying to impress upon Tom that Thursday night, but it's always problematic to sort out, quote, what was said, end quote, from, quote, what was heard, end quote, whatever uncertainties such as these arrive. Beyond these possible misunderstandings and misrepresentations, one item of great interest is Tom's confident statement that the book will contain 100 different life stories, each of which would tell the how and the whence from the spirit of righteous living was reborn in each man. Such a book would presumably have just one chapter of exposition, there is a solution, followed by a large collection of real-life stories that would collectively elucidate the benefits of psychoanalysis and medical treatment, but little or nothing else. Whatever Tom's understanding may have been, it's unlikely this was Bill Wilson's conception in mid-June 1938 of how the book would be organized. In all likelihood, he had already embraced the more expansive vision Hank Parkhurst was just then in the process of outlining for the book. Also worth noting is Tom's reluctance to use the word alcoholics as part of the book's title or as the name of the group. Clearly, Bill had suggested this terminology since the letter originally used that phrase in 4 different places in bold capital letters. But Tom obviously found the term distasteful, and he very deliberately went back over the letter, erasing the 4 instances of the words alcoholics, all in capital letters, as best he could, and substituting victors, all in capital letters, in their place using black ink. A handwritten sidebar apologizes to Bill for these last-minute edits, asking him to excuse the stenographic work, please. The word victor, quote unquote, certainly has a distinctly positive ring to it, conveying an optimism lacking in the darker and more pejorative alcoholic. But Victors Anonymous conveys almost no information about the victory being won, while Alcoholics Anonymous leaves no doubt about the problem that needs to be conquered. Tom's final contribution was important. He notes that the, quote, the suggested title and signature are merely thoughts that occur, end quote, to him, and concedes that they may not fit what Wilson has in mind. Identifying the authors as Victors Anonymous certainly doesn't fit as far as Bill and Hank were concerned, but Tom's suggestion to title the book 100 Men was a huge success, immediately capturing both of their attentions. This title was quickly and enthusiastically adopted and would have a prominent and interesting history over the next several months as the book project moved towards completion. Hank was particularly smitten with the phrase, and he later used 100 Men not only as the working title of the book, but also as the name of the corporation that he formed to finance and promote it.
Since there are no surviving copies of either Bill Wilson's cover letter or the promotional brochure itself, it is impossible to say whether Hank and Bill ever adopted Tom's suggestion of including a single-page introduction with the chapters they were sending out. But changes were constantly being made to the text of those two chapters, so it is possible that this might have been done. A liberally edited version of Tom's introduction would probably have made a valuable addition to their brochure, serving as an effective tool for quickly grabbing the reader's attention and enticing them to look further into the document.
Parkhurst's outline establishes the book's contents.
In the third week of June, Hank Parkhurst created a comprehensive outline for the proposed book, one far more ambitious than Tom Thatcher's straightforward idea of compiling and publishing 100 real-life stories on recovery. Parentheses. What else would one expect from Henry G. Parkhurst but a more ambitious plan? Close parentheses. Hank's outline significantly scaled back the number of personal stories and then added 10 additional expositional chapters on a wide variety of topics related to the problem of alcoholism and its solution. According to Parkhurst, the book would open with the two chapters already written. There is a solution, parentheses, quote, introduces Alcoholics Anonymous. There follows a description of ourselves, the alcoholic problem, and our solution. The chapter is general and casts a shadow of that to follow, closed quote, close parentheses. And Bill's story, parentheses, quote, narrative 1, an alcoholic's life experience, how he found the answer, close quote, close parentheses. These two would then be followed by 13 chapters of personal stories. Chapters 3 through 10, presenting one story each, parentheses, quote, the narrator of the first story introduces others, will tell what they were like and what they have found, close quote, close parentheses. While chapters 11 through 15 would include 4 shorter stories each, parentheses, quote, these will contain groups of stories written by alcoholic men and women, close quote, close parentheses, for a total of 29 personal stories of recovery. This is just one less than the actual number of stories published in the first printing of the big book 10 months later. The difference being caused by the last-minute addition of a story called Lone Endeavor. It is also interesting to notice that Hank thought it would be necessary to add some appropriate editorial comments at the end of each of these stories, quote, emphasizing and analyzing, quote, close quote, any significant points of interest they might have raised. Hank was planning to exercise some editorial control over the stories submitted, most likely anticipating that, if nothing else, the Akron stories would require some oversight. Note also that Hank once again uses the phrase, quote unquote, Alcoholics Anonymous as the name of the group, and perhaps as the name of parentheses, and perhaps as the name of the book. He is typically unclear, close parentheses. Following the personal stories, the next 10 chapters, Hank describes are remarkably prophetic in predicting the topics that would actually be covered in the big book. Since none of those chapters have titles, they were simply numbered 16 through 25. Perhaps the clearest way to illustrate the accuracy of his vision is to list the titles of the chapters that currently appear in the first 164 pages of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, followed by the corresponding quotes from Hank's outline in which he describes the suggested contents for each of the proposed chapters.
The doctor's opinion. Testimony of a well-known physician who has specialized a lifetime with alcoholics. At his hospital, he has seen many of us recover whom he has pronounced incurable. It will also cover the problem in lay language from the medical and psychiatric point of view. And that's from Hank's chapter number 17. Chapters 1 and 2, There's a Solution and Bill's Story, are already written. And then from Hank's chapter number 18, 3 more about alcoholism. Devoted to the vagaries of the alcoholic mind, bearing especially on mental and emotional states, having observed each other under new conditions, we think our experiences will be of immense benefit to alcoholic readers. It will give the medical profession the intimate view of these men's minds they so much desire. And from Hank's number 16, We Agnostics, most of us were honest in being agnostic. This chapter is so directed. Hank's chapter number 19 is on 5 and 6, how it works into action. Having secured the confidence of the alcoholic reader, we tell him just what he can do about it. Detailed instructions for working out his situation with his priest, his pastor, the reader, wife, or best friend will be given. Our experience shows that a man can do this if he follows directions. Great numbers can be touched by the book in this fashion. And we have Hank's chapter number 20, it's working with others, number 7. Hank says, we observe that once an alcoholic has a spiritual experience, he must throw himself into work for others. It is preferable that he work with other alcoholics, for he can do things which no one else can do. This chapter will detail just how to help others and build up a new group of friends. This chapter will give a blind address to which an alcoholic who has recovered and is helping others may write. When the correspondence indicates real results, we shall contact and draw them into fellowship. And from Hank's chapter 21, this is in the big book 8 and 9, to wives and the family afterward, Hank says, dealing with wives, relatives and friends, showing them how they may help. And then Hank's chapter number 22 is number 10, to employers. Hank says, herein employers will be given the new view of alcoholism as it affects their interests. Many specific suggestions will be made as to how, in the best interest of all, the employer may handle the myriad situations which are so baffling to him at present. And finally, Hank's chapter 20, number 24, is covering chapter 11, A Vision for You. Hank says, this chapter will disclose our life as a group, our work as a group, our present situations, and our attitude toward the outside world of life and business. We shall show how our simple common denominator works in the everyday world.
This is a remarkable achievement. In this earliest outline, Parkhurst has accurately accounted for each of the chapters that would eventually be published in the book, and he almost perfectly designated the correct number of stories that would appear in the first printing. It's hard to understand Bill Wilson's later dismissive comments that they had, quote, been unable to come up with any genuine outline for the publication, end quote, and that they had that all they had to work with while writing the book was Hank's, quote, hastily drawn up list of possible chapter headings, end quote. No genuine outline? The order of appearance here is a bit off, but Hank has rather accurately articulated the context of each of the published chapters, parenthesis, not just supplied possible chapter headings, which in fact were not supplied, close parenthesis, and his outline must have been more than a little helpful when the writing of the book began in earnest in late September. The outline provides a suggestive template for each new chapter as it was being written, and perhaps most significant, there are no chapters in the big book that were not suggested in Hank Parkhurst's outline.
2 chapters that weren't included.
There were, however, 2 chapters in Hank's outline that never made their way into the book. The first of these was to be, quote, devoted to the potential alcoholic, end quote, which Parkhurst thought necessary so that, quote, the potential alcoholic and others may definitely recognize the symptoms before great consequences develop. That came from Hank's chapter number 25. The inclusion of the phrase "and others" is interesting since it presumes people who might know a potential alcoholic would, first of all, have been reading this book and then understood it well enough to warn him about his incipient problem, thereby referring him to the book to gain some insight into how he might avoid the pitfalls of his budding alcoholism. And while the spirit of helpfulness would be a clear motivation for delivering such a warning, it is unclear that the big problem with writing such an enlightening chapter would be the necessity of providing a definite answer to Hank's earlier question, quote, "What is an alcoholic?" End quote. Such a definition would be the only way to differentiate the poor out-of-control drinker from his potential alcoholic brother, and we have already seen what an impossible challenge it has been for both Bill and Hank to produce a simple and straightforward answer to that question. Although this proposed chapter was never written, both the idea of and the phrase of, quote, "the potential alcoholic" do have a number of appearances in the Big Book. In Bill's story, parenthesis, open parenthesis, quote, "I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was nearly failed my law course, ... close quote, close parenthesis. In More About Alcoholism, open parenthesis, quote, "Potential female alcoholics often turn into the real, ... close quote. Quote, "We see large numbers of potential alcoholics among young people everywhere, ... quote, and quote, "Though you may be able to stop for a considerable period, you may yet be a potential alcoholic," close quote. And finally, quote, "But the actual or potential alcoholic with hardly any exception will absolutely be unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge." And then again to employers, quote, "That company may harbor many actual or potential alcoholics," end quote. In addition to these specific references, the possibility of someone being just a potential alcoholic informs much of the discussion on the nature of alcoholism in the Big Book, from the quote-unquote moderate drinker, hard drinkers, and real alcoholics distinctions described in There Is a Solution, to the 4 categories of problem drinkers so extensively outlined in the chapter to wives. Although it did not receive its own chapter, the concept of someone being a potential alcoholic did receive a fair amount of treatment and notice throughout the book. Hank's remaining suggested chapter was never written, nor does the topic he intended to cover in it receive much direct mention in the Big Book. It was to be devoted to the insightful analysis of what had not worked for them in their efforts to get people sober, and it was meant to serve as a guide for newly recovered alcoholics and those who were involved in the all-important job of working with people who were still drinking.
Chapter 23. We shall emphasize that we have no cure-all. The sufferer must be willing to recover and cannot be too much handicapped by other great mental and nervous abnormalities. Our failures with many such types will be analysed at length. We have learned more from our failures than our successes. This should be a valuable chapter for new men and women, that they may recognise their handicaps and may readily perceive the difficulties of those they seek to help.
In June of 1938, this was seen as an essential chapter for the book, and Hank had convinced Bill it would make an important contribution to the cause of recovery. When Wilson wrote to Dr. Bob Smith immediately after this outline was completed, he referred to it favorably as, quote, "the chapter on failures," end quote. And shortly after that, in another letter, he all but quotes Hank's pragmatic criteria for this chapter, saying, quote, "I feel that I have always learned more from the failures than from the successes," end quote. A chapter called, quote unquote, "on failure," or perhaps, quote unquote, "our failures," would have made for compelling reading, especially since there have been so many of them. Identifying which cases should be included would have presented a challenge, not only in the sorting out of the individual cases of failure, but also in relation to the presentation of those former members' anonymity. Bill later gave some idea of how this chapter might be read when he commented to Dr. Bob Smith that, quote, "the story of a fellow like Ernie would be omitted from this series of success stories, but could be included in the shorter narratives, or perhaps considering his wonderful comeback with powerful effect in the chapter on failures." In addition, Hank felt it was important to underline the fact that a successful candidate for sobriety could not be too, quote, "handicapped by other great mental and nervous abnormalities," end quote. There was a fair amount of talk at the time in both New York and Akron about how impossible it was to help people who were burdened by serious emotional problems above and beyond their alcoholism. Both the leadership and the other members of AA were constantly trying to distance themselves from the walking wounded they encountered with such regularity in the shelters and the missions of the inner city. This disclaimer about the inability of unstable people to get sober would be slowly tempered over the next several months and finally modified to the point that the first paragraph of the 5th chapter in the Big Book, How It Works, would end by noting, quote, "There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest," end quote. Emotional and mental issues would admittedly create an additional layer of complications for active alcoholics, but this does not categorically preclude them from getting sober. Only those who are, quote, "constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves," end quote, would be left to suffer that unfortunate fate.
Bill's letter announcing the book to Dr. Bob.
Almost 5 weeks after he had started writing in earnest, and 1 week after going public by mailing out 2 chapters to a potential donor, Bill Wilson sent a long letter to Dr. Bob Smith announcing he had not only launched the book project, but that it was already well underway. This is an important letter, not only for a proper understanding of the evolution of the Big Book, but also for the insights it provides into the relationship between these 2 men at this time. Most notable is the fact that Bill had not been in touch with Bob Smith since his last visit to Akron almost 8 weeks earlier. An amazingly long time to have absolutely no contact between these 2 groups, especially with such an important project just getting started. It only serves to underline the fact that up to this point, the book was a New York project only, and understandably so. The 2 chapters Bill sent to Bob, along with his letter, were proof in black and white that the brand of sobriety being practiced in New York City was far different from what was happening in Akron. Bill was fully aware of how stark these differences must appear, and the letter reflects his best efforts to sell what he had already written and circulated to Dr. Bob and to the other Ohio members of the group newly named Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill begins a bit sheepishly by explaining why he has launched this project in spite of the strident opposition the Akron group had expressed to him just 2 months earlier. "Dear Bob, I have been most remiss, but there have been reasons. After getting home from Akron, I had about concluded to let the book idea lie quiet while people thought it over. I found, however, that a lot of people, including Frank Amos, had got quite a fire. Frank thought something ought to be started right away. I told him that you people had only just begun to consider the matter and pointed out at length the dangers and difficulties of such a venture, particularly our fear of undesirable publicity. Considering the rate at which we grow, he and others, including myself, began to think that publicity would come anyhow. Why then not our own anonymous view of ourselves, thus precluding the possibility that someone else garbled the situation before we had a chance to say anything? Thus we came to the conclusion that in a tentative way, a beginning should be made. In this fashion, having some definite proposals laid out and some printing done, we would have a concrete basis for discussion."
Bill was willing to admit his own part in the decision to launch this book project, but even while doing so, he artfully sidesteps much of the responsibility by placing it squarely in the lap of John D. Rockefeller's associate, Frank Amos. The clear implication is that Amos's opinion carried more than enough weight to override the Ohio objections and effectively decide the issue. Bill not only agreed with Frank, he also argued that their recent phenomenal growth had made it absolutely essential they write down their own anonymous view of themselves and of their program for recovery. Only by making such a preemptive strike could they prevent some outsider from writing about them first, someone who would surely get the message all wrong and end up painting an unfavorable picture of them. Surrendering to Akron's pressure and believing it was essential that they get into print sooner rather than later, Bill had made a tentative attempt at the book, one which could now serve as the basis of an ongoing discussion about how the rest of the book should be put together. What is not said here, at least not directly, is that the New York group, in a stunning disregard for collective decision-making, had unilaterally vetoed all of Akron's objections and begun to write the book on their own and without any further consultation with the Ohio members. The letter continued with details on the progress they had already made with the project.
As a starting point, I have, with the help of the folks here, dictated and mimeographed 2 chapters of the proposed book, one in the nature of an introduction, and the second my own story. These I enclose to you together with a rough outline of the contents of other chapters. I imagine you could use the material as a sort of trial balloon and a starting point for discussion of what you folks out there believe the book ought to contain.
Wilson was confident, parenthesis, or at least he was trying to sound as confident as possible, close parenthesis, that the reality of these 2 finished chapters, along with an outline of the entire book, would change the negative opinions they had encountered in Akron several weeks earlier and allow the Ohio group to begin a positive discussion of the merits of the individual chapters rather than continuing to protest the fact that the book was being written in the first place.
Although I have made the beginning, I feel that the completed book should represent the work of many people, particularly the individual stories, which I think should be as little edited as possible. They will naturally be the heart of the book and must represent the feelings, experiences, and personalities of those who write them.
Bill's disavowal of primary authorship here is based on the proposed centrality of the personal stories, which, according to the outline, were to be prominently positioned in the front of the book and were projected to take up more than 60% of the entire text. Who would be responsible for writing the remaining 10 chapters called for in Hank's outline is a question he never addresses. Regarding those personal stories, Bill now tried to further assuage some of Akron's expected hostility by offering the writing of one of these stories to Dr. Bob's wife, Ann Smith.
As you will note, the chapter outline calls for 9 stories of a chapter each about the same length as my own. My feeling is that Anne should do the one portraying the wife of an alcoholic. We have here in New York a very striking story in the person of Florence Rankin, who is an alcoholic and also the wife of an alcoholic. She has been all right for about 9 months and has a very unusual and powerful witness. It may be that, like Anne, she should have a chapter to herself.
This is Bill Wilson at his political best. He is well aware of the opposition to this project in Akron, and he is sensitive to the resentments his proposal will generate. What better way to diffuse that animosity than by making an offer to the beloved quote-unquote mother of Ohio AA, asking her to write one of the most prominent stories in the proposed book, the one telling the story of recovery from the perspective of an alcoholic's wife.
Wilson seems confident that this would provide a significant Akron counterbalance to what could only be perceived as a predominantly East Coast enterprise. The inclusion of Ann Smith's personal story would amply demonstrate this wasn't just a New York project, and Bill even sweetens his offer further by promising that Ann need not fear being the only woman writing her story for the book. Florence Rankin would also have her own story in the back. If Ann Smith had accepted this generous offer, it might have gone a long way towards facilitating the acceptance of the book project in Akron, but she immediately and unequivocally declined the honor. The short, 2-page story entitled An Alcoholic's Wife did appear in the first edition of the Big Book and was eventually written by Marie Bray, the non-alcoholic wife of another AA member in Akron. Regarding those 9 full personal stories, Bill explained that,
"Then we might, beginning with myself, take several of us in consecutive order, omitting any who have fallen from grace. The story of a fellow like Ernie would be omitted from this series, but could be included in the shorter narrative, or perhaps, considering his wonderful comeback with powerful effect, in the chapter on failures."
Bill's concept of how the stories would be arranged is identical to the list of 25 professions Hank Parkhurst had created earlier in the month for the story section. They would start with Bill, who had the most time sober, and then present quote unquote, in consecutive order, the stories of the others who had gotten and stayed sober. This would obviously mean that Bob's story would appear second in the series.
It is thought each of these 9 chapters should run about 5,000 words. Then we might have 5 chapters each consisting of 5 witnesses of about 1,000 words each, selected mostly, I should think, consecutively, except for some especially striking case and the witnesses of a couple of beginners.
The 9 long stories by those with the most sobriety would be followed by 25 shorter stories that would also be presented in chronological order, although a couple of stories by beginners might be inserted in this section for dramatic effect. Note the bill has increased the number of stories in this multiple story chapter to 5 short stories each, one more than Hank's outline suggested of 4 stories each for these chapters. Also of interest here is Bill's mention that the suggested length of all the chapters in the book should be 5,000 words, a target he most likely arrived at while struggling to write the first 2 chapters, which in this early stage numbered roughly 5,800 and 5,350 words, respectively.
Bill then graciously moves away from this proposed conception of the book and invites Dr. Bob and other Ohio members to liberally edit what he has done, and even to freely invent something completely different if they think that might be best.
The foregoing are suggestions only. We can never tell where the next best idea may come from and who will make a still better suggestion. So please take the picture I have sketched and do not hesitate to add, subtract, and multiply it in any way which occurs to you all. I am not suffering at the moment from any pride of authorship, so let everyone do their best, and if they like, their worst.
Despite this generous request for criticism, Bill just couldn't restrain his natural talent for being the director, and he immediately goes on to offer Bob concrete suggestions on how to present the 2 chapters and the outline, and then gives an exhaustively detailed account of what should go into each of the individual stories he was expecting the Ohio members to start writing in the very near future.
It might be a good idea if you showed this stuff around generally and then ask people to write their own stories in their own language and at all the length they want, covering those experiences from childhood up, which illustrate the salient points of their character. Probably emphasis should be placed on those qualities and actions which cause them to come into collision with their fellows, and those things which lay beneath the tendency to excessive drinking. The queer state of mind and emotion preceding the first drink, the first medical attention required, the various institutions visited, these ought to be brought in. There ought to be a description of the man's feelings as he met our crowd, his first sense of God being with him, his feeling of hopelessness, and now his sense of victory, his application of principles to his everyday life, including domestic, business, and relations with other alcoholics, the release he gets from working with others, the victories God has given him, the problems which still face him, and his progress with them. These are other possible points. When this is done, we can sit down with the authors one at a time and fit their story into the pattern of the book. Everyone should write with feeling, not laying it on too thick, however, and above all, let's not try to be literary. It will be much better to be guided.
This final word, quote unquote, guided, refers, of course, to the guidance one receives from God during quiet time. The practice Frank Amos had cited in his report as being so critical in the Akron program of continued sobriety, a practice they believe had to be faithfully followed every morning to prevent, quote, the grave danger of backsliding, end quote. The Oxford group's suggested method for quiet time required people to sit with a, quote, a pencil and a notebook so that they might record every God-given thought and idea that comes to them during their time alone with him, that no detail, however small, may be lost.
This is the model Bill was advising the Ohio members to use when writing their own stories, relying primarily on God's inspiration rather than attempting to produce a polished literary work. Bill concluded this section of his letter by telling Dr. Bob he wanted him to assume responsibility for promoting this project in Akron.
I can't say how soon I shall get to Akron, for we are in the throes of raising more money to carry on with. But if you could get the ball rolling along these lines, it will be great. This will greatly facilitate tying up the packages quickly and neatly later on.
Bill would not be coming back to Ohio anytime in the near future, nor did he plan to do anything further to sell the project to the Akron members. That was Bob's job now, and he would also be held responsible for getting the Ohio members to actually begin writing their personal stories. Having covered all the important details regarding the book and passed responsibility for the Ohio portion of this project onto Dr. Bob, Bill proceeded to the topic that had consumed almost all his time and energy since he had finished writing the 2 chapters.
Now about money matters. In the first place, I'm sure we could use quite a bit to carry on the general work for the next year. Situations are bound to arise which will need some underpinning. Moreover, it is going to take time and money to get this book out and put it into circulation.
The quote-unquote general work mentioned is what Bill and Hank were doing every day, working with both new and old drunks, along with the time and money they were spending on promotion as they solicited donations from the rich to support these efforts. Since at this time, neither of these men had any real outside source of income, it's understandable that Wilson felt they would require quite a bit of money if they were going to maintain the office in Newark and continue to pay all of the other normal living expenses necessary to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. This need for financial assistance was self-evident to the people in New York, but Bill understood that his reasoning had to be laid out explicitly to counter the Akron abhorrence of money and their belief that it would only act as a contaminant for the work being done.
Where this money would come from was still something of a mystery. Although Wilson and Parkhurst were confident the book was a viable product, and they were equally certain that if it was promoted and sold properly, it would eventually generate more than enough profit for them to carry on. In addition, they were not the only 2 people in New York who were feeling so confident about this venture.
In this latter connection, we are told by Silas Bent that if we can produce a book as useful and as moving as the first 2 chapters suggest, it may have a very large sale. You will remember Silas as an alcoholic we worked with out here. He's a star reporter and writer, and as it was at one time editor of the New York Times Sunday magazine. He thoroughly knows all the ropes we shall need and offers his services as an editor or as a writer if we so desire. He thinks that prior to the publication of the book, articles based upon it should be published in the Reader's Digest, Saturday Evening Post, etc., or perhaps some of the chapters of the book itself. This would ensure a very large sale of the volume if it is any good. We think we can get some of the life insurance companies to recommend in their advertising that people read the book.
Nervous about the Ohio response to these 2 chapters, Bill is happy to report that a local professional has pronounced them useful and moving, and notes he is confident they will prove to be an effective marketing tools for the book. Reader's Digest and the Saturday Evening Post were the 2 most widely read magazines at the time, and in this age before television, they were, along with radio, the primary vehicles for communicating with the American public. Bill's mention of them here is surely ambitious, but as later events would prove, his hope for using these 2 magazines to help expand the AA movement were not completely unfounded. The possibility of publishing an article about the book in Reader's Digest would consume a considerable amount of Bill's and Hank's energy over the coming months, but it was the eventual publication of the Jack Alexander article on Alcoholics Anonymous in the March 1st, 1941 issue of the Saturday Evening Post that would produce exactly the kind of explosive results that Wilson predicts here. Wilson's concluding idea that life insurance companies would become active partners in the promotion of the book may seem a bit strange today, but this was one of Hank's most cherished convictions at the time. Parkhurst was thoroughly convinced that life insurance companies, who he claimed constantly paid out large settlements for drinking-related deaths, would quickly realize the benefits they could reap by reducing the number of active alcoholics among their insured customers. There's a plausible logic at work here, but the life insurance companies never fully appreciated Hank's argument, and his prediction that they would happily spend money on advertising this new cure turned out to be another one of his many unrealistic expectations for the book.
Despite the fact that Bill had openly invited criticism, there was something very finished about these 2 chapters and the outline mailed to Akron. It was a neat and tidy package, presenting formidable challenge to any would-be critic. What Bill had sent could easily accommodate an occasional suggestion or correction, but the self-contained completeness of it all discouraged wholesale rejection unless that person was willing to undertake the complete rewrite of both the outline and the individual chapters.
Wilson had already put in the hard work needed to get this far in the project, and there was really no one in Akron with the time, energy, commitment, talent, or willingness to make the effort necessary to create a completely different version of the book. Perhaps realizing this, Bill offered Bob a very open question near the end of this letter, generously inviting his opinions on a matter that had not yet been decided at all: the title of the book.
By the way, you might all be thinking up a good title. Nearly everyone agrees that we should sign the volume Alcoholics Anonymous. Titles such as Haven, 100 Men, Comes the Dawn, etc. have been suggested.
While there was general agreement that the authors should remain anonymous, Hank's suggestion for titling the book Alcoholics Anonymous had obviously not yet gained much traction. And why should it? There were so many other much more colorful titles to be imagined. Here, Bill mentions just 3, but the list of possible titles would grow significantly over the next 7 months as, quote-unquote, naming the book became something of a popular parlor game among the New York members.
Bill then asked Bob another open-ended question and supplied some context for that question.
What would you think about the formation of a charitable corporation to be called, let us say, Alcoholics Anonymous? Money coming in from the book could be handled through it, as well as any funds arising from contributions by corporations who benefited by our work. We should always remember that perhaps someday our activities will be scrutinized by hostile microscopes with the idea of proving we are a racket. If we now form a corporation whose control is exercised by a board composed largely of disinterested and non-alcoholic people, we shall have closed the door to such criticism. The trustees of this corporation could administer any other enterprises we might want to engage in, such, for instance, as sanitariums.
As it was in Hank's ideas, the idea of forming their own foundation was now clearly in the forefront of Bill's mind, and so, for the first time, he tells Bob Smith of their plan to create a foundation, sharing not only his justification for that plan, but also outlining the way in which the foundation would be structured and what kind of responsibilities and duties it would have, including the oversight of any sanitariums they might establish. This same formula would be brought up again a few weeks later when Bill convinced Dr. Bob to become one of the trustees of the foundation, which was finally set up in early August. In the final paragraph, Bill supplies Bob with some specific details about their work with potential donors, explaining the current status of their efforts and their hopes.
It is expected that we can obtain from friends of Frank Amos suitable to whom it may concern letters introducing us to people of means. The plan is to approach such people saying that we need funds to carry on our general work and to publish this book. They will be shown chapters of the book and will be told that we intend to become self-supporting within 1 year, but that we shall need financial assistance in the meantime. So we are hard at work in the money department out here, and I have no doubt that we shall raise what we need. When this is accomplished, some of us will probably come out for a visit, at which time we can develop matters further.
Bill is being a bit duplicitous here and failing to note that the fundraising plans were already well launched. McGuire had had this kind of promotional package in hand for a week when this letter was written. Still, it is worth noting that one feature included in the initial presentation letter emphasized their commitment to being fully self-supporting within a year. Wilson's confidence in this matter, however misplaced, is almost charming to see.
Jim, have you got that?
Me?
Finally, things are firmly on track, Jim. Yeah, and significant.
All right. Finally, things are firmly on track and significant progress is being made on what needs to be done to spread their solution across the country. Bill closes with a firm, warm salutation for everyone in Ohio and a postscript containing something of a mixed message. Meanwhile, salutations to the alcoholic brethren and God be with you all. Much yours, signed Bill. P.S. I believe Frank Amos concurs. Let us know what you think. That is handwritten above the typed strikeout. The original P.S., which was striked out, says, P.S. I am mailing Frank Amos a copy of this letter, and I think he concurs for the most part in its contents. Please let us know what.
Once again, there is mention that a duplicate copy of this letter has been made, and it is being used to apprise other people of the current state of their efforts. This seemingly generous final solicitation that Bob, quote, let us know what you think, end quote, comes packaged with the implicit reminder that these are not just Bill's ideas. They also have the endorsement of the Rockefeller man, Frank Amos. There is a certain symmetry to this postscript, one which hardly creates an open invitation for any kind of serious criticism. The letter opened with an emphasis on Frank Amos's enthusiastic approval of the book project and ends with his much more sweeping approval of the items discussed in this letter. If Bob had any objections to what was being done in New York City, then he would not just be disagreeing with Bill, and parenthetically Hank, he would also be rejecting the concurrence of one of John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s intimates.
Frank Amos's letter to Albert Scott.
The Rockefeller men were, in fact, in full support of all these efforts. Amos, the member of the group who was most involved with AA's day-to-day activities in New York City at this time, had already received a copy of the 2 chapters and the outline, and he was delighted to see that the book project had finally been launched. He was also impressed with the writing Bill had done so far and felt it provided convincing evidence for the credibility of the growing fellowship and for their solution to alcoholism. On the same day Wilson was writing his second letter to McGuire, Amos sent a letter to the leader of the December 13th, 1937 Rockefeller meeting, Albert Scott, who had just returned from an extended medical leave in Florida, giving him a summary of the progress, quote, the self-styled alcoholic squad, end quote, had made during Scott's 4-month absence and included copies of the outline and the first 2 chapters of the book.
June the 24th, 1938. Mr. Albert L. Scott, Lockwood Green Engineers Incorporated, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, New York City. Dear Mr. Scott, since your return, I have wanted an opportunity to tell you in detail the developments in the activities of the self-styled alcoholic squad, both here and at Akron. The work has been going on splendidly, and every day evidences are piling up which strengthen my conviction that these fellows are not only on the level, but have developed a Christian technique which, if earnestly followed out, can be effective in a majority of cases of this character. There are 2 things that these men are particularly anxious about. One is that along carefully worked out logical lines, their influence can gradually spread to other parts of the country. The second is that they can gradually become self-supporting so far as this particular work is concerned. I have been in constant consultation with the leaders here, and just recently paid a brief visit to Akron, spending my entire time with Dr. and Mrs. Smith and Paul Stanley. Smith and Stanley were 2 of the group who we met in our original meeting. After securing a great deal of expert advice from various quarters, including 2 writers of a national reputation, they have decided to bring out a book. They hope that the revenue from the sale of this book will be of material financial assistance. Their desire is to have a cross-section of experience from a large number of the group, selecting only those who have been in this work for long enough to convince the leaders that they are permanently cured and therefore good practical examples. The idea is for the book not to bear the names of any author, but to be by, in quotes, Alcoholics Anonymous. They figure that it may take a year to complete, and they have offers to have it carefully edited by two writers of national reputation, one of whom is Floyd Parsons, providing this proves desirable. It is hoped that endorsement of the book and of this work can be incorporated in it over the names of at least one outstanding physician of national reputation and at least one person who is likewise well known, and thus adding great strength and authenticity to what the book contains. I am sending you a rough draft of the first dictation. The first page is not to be part of the book, but is outlining the purpose of it. The rest is a rough beginning on chapter 1 and on the first story of an ex-alcoholic. Now, if you can spare the time and strength, I wish you would read this if possible within the next few days and let me know what you think of it. In fact, if you can spare any time, I should like to come over and discuss the matter with you for half an hour. I am more than ever impressed with the sincerity and the practical ability of these gentlemen, and believe it well worth our while to back it up in every possible manner. Mrs. Amos joins me in warmest regards to Mrs. Scott and yourself. Sincerely yours, Frank B. Amos.
It is hard to miss how Amos's enthusiasm for the work of the quote-unquote self-styled alcoholic squad has grown since Scott left for Florida in late February. In Frank's opinion, these men appear to have found a cure for alcoholism, and their efforts are therefore, quote, well worth every possible manner, end quote, of support from Mr. Rockefeller's friends, especially now that they have adopted a strategy of becoming self-supporting rather than depending on the large outside contributions they had previously sought, and which Scott had been so sure would ultimately be the ruin of all their work. Albert Scott's reaction to this was positive, and he wrote a strong letter of recommendation for Bill Wilson to use as an introduction to the list of millionaires they had already been given. Scott's letter and several other testimonials were then added to the brochure that Hank prepared as the primary device for getting appointments with potential donors. Going forward, Amos would frequently consult with Bill Wilson and Hank Parkhurst, and they in turn would come to rely on him as the primary conduit for passing along information about their progress to the other members of the Rockefeller Circle.
A slip averted.
Sorry. It had been a busy couple of weeks, and the stress of it all had taken a toll on the Wilson household. Lois actually missed the finalization of the outline and the late June letters to McGuire, Smith, and Amos because she left Brooklyn on Wednesday, June 22nd, to visit her sister Barbara. Returning home 3 days later, she and Bill went over to New Jersey to spend Saturday night with the Parkhursts and then stayed on for Sunday dinner. There is no way of knowing exactly what happened between Bill and Lois during the 48 hours following her return, but the next day there was a huge blow-up at the house in Brooklyn, which was not an altogether unusual occurrence in the Wilsons' marriage. Lois dramatically describes their argument saying, quote, I got mad at Bill and he dashed out to take a drink, but went to Parkhurst's instead, close quote. Her diary provides a bit of additional color, noting that after she, quote, got mad at Bill, close quote, he, quote, went over to Jersey for lunch, and that the fight had been so bad that he, quote, came close to taking a drink.
At this point, the idea of Bill Wilson running out to a bar and getting drunk after 3.5 years of continuous sobriety is a profoundly disturbing thought, and it is hard to imagine how Alcoholics Anonymous would ever have survived such a crushing blow. But, however thirsty Bill may have been that morning, he exhibited just enough spiritual sanity to act on his second, rather than first, thought, and he turned to his friend Hank Parkhurst for help rather than picking up the first drink.
Once again, one drunk talking to another drunk proved to be the critical element in preserving sobriety. It would be interesting to know the specifics of their conversation that afternoon in Montclair, New Jersey. Was Bill, for instance, taking advice from Hank on how to stay sober? Or did Hank just commiserate with him on his marital troubles? Perhaps even more so, it would be fascinating to know whether Bill Wilson publicly acknowledged how close he had come to drinking when he moderated the regular Tuesday night meeting the next night. How their founder, the most sober member of the group, had successfully navigated his way through such a strong temptation would have surely made for an interesting topic of discussion at that meeting.
But Bill didn't drink. When he woke up on the morning of Tuesday, June 28th, he was still a man, excuse me. When he woke up on the morning of Tuesday, June 28th, he was still a man who could, with a clear conscience, go forth and preach the message of recovery he believed in so fervently. He must have been greatly relieved and pleased to be sober that day, for he had passed a tremendously challenging test. He also must have been proud of the remarkable amount of progress made in the previous 5 weeks. 2 proposed chapters of the book had been written and were already being circulated among their supporters and potential donors. There was even a detailed outline of what the entire book would look like once it was finished. In addition, the Ohio group had been formally notified that he had begun the book project, and copies of the first 2 chapters and an outline had been sent to Dr. Bob's group for their consideration. Finally, members in both New York and Ohio had been explicitly asked to start writing their own personal stories of recovery for inclusion in the book. The volume that would describe their new method of recovery and spread that news across the country was decidedly and decisively underway. But the publication of the book, they speculated, was still a year away. What needed to be done right now was to execute the plan to raise money that Bill had described in his letter to Dr. Bob.
Bill Wilson had never been more committed to a course of action than he was to these fundraising efforts. And with this professional-looking promotion package for their writing project in hand, he was again confident that this time he would be able to convince wealthy donors to make large contributions that would carry them through the projected 12 months of writing, and he was equally positive he would be able to make those donations start coming in their way very soon. Imagine his despair if he could have known then that there would be no contributions whatsoever in the near future, and that it would be another 3 months before he'd find his way back to writing more chapters for this all-important new book.
End of chapter 10, the outline, late June 1938. A lot of growing and understanding there. Would you like to unmute yourself and show appreciation for that chapter and our readers?
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you so much.
Wow,
Good
that was
job.
great. Thank you so much.
Oh, Mr. Scherberg. Good to have you here. Lovely to have you here.
What
Thank
great
you.
research.
Thank you. Thank you. Amazing.
Shall we go up to Bill and see what Bill has to say to us?
Yeah. Thank you for the compliments on the research. The most challenging thing wasn't just slogging through all those documents. It was cobbling things together so that the story could be told in a coherent way that people would understand. And and I'm grateful for the way this came out, for sure. I've got just 2 other things I want. Probably my favorite story of doing research for this book was Sarah didn't have permission to come into GSO. We hadn't gotten let's not go into that story. But she came up to Stepping Stones with me whenever I was doing research there, and we were severely limited by the amount of time they were going to allow us to actually look at stuff. So the two of us were there going through things as fast as we could and trying to pick out things that were important. And Sarah's on one side of the table and I'm on the other side of the table. And all of a sudden she's going through this folder and she says, William, you need to come over here. You need to come over here. And I mean, we had read this letter to McGuire, the second letter to McGuire, and we knew that there was an outline. I mean, I've heard about an outline, but nobody had seen the outline. Nobody had found the outline. And bingo, right there in this file folder in Stepping Stones was the outline, these 25 things that Hank Parkhurst did. And we were just like, man, that was a happy day for the two of us. That was just great. We were really jacked up seriously about that. The other thing I thought about as we were reading this is, this is a really long letter to Dr. Bob. I think it's like 5 pages long in the original typing. It's a long letter. And elsewhere, like with Frank Gamis's letter here to Albert Scott, I just put the whole letter in and do a couple of comments afterwards. But there was so much important stuff in that letter that I realized what I needed to do, what it felt to me I needed to do, was put the first section in and make sure people understood what was going on in that thing, and then put the entire letter is there, but it's just broken down into discrete parts with commentary, because otherwise, I mean, certainly if I were to read the letter all the way through all 5 pages, I'd miss it 80% of the important stuff in it. So I slowed it down and I broke the letter up and did the whole deal that way. And I'm glad I did it. Made sense to me when I read it today. So.
Thank you, Bill. Let's go over and see if Jim wants it. Jim Worley out of History Only course on Facebook. Great to have you, Jim, as well, reading for us.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks, Bill. And the thing that stuck out to me was the long letter. And there are other parts in the book that we read that I didn't really know that there was that much actual communication between Bill and Bob during this time. Now, what the reasons were and what was going on, and that's a whole other story. But there was a lot of communication between them, and that I had no idea about previously. So Bob was being informed one way or another. And of course, we know that he didn't really pass on most of that information, but kept it secret. But that information was being passed, and the two were in contact during this time.
Okay, thank you, Jim. If you're new here, you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand and we'll call on you. So, Billy, you saying that if you hadn't found that letter, someone else might have had to found it before we got access to it? Is that
you mean the outline itself?
The outline, beg your pardon. Yeah, if you hadn't found it.
Yeah. It's just I don't know. The biggest problem we had when we first were going to Stepping Stones under the former executive director was she was just not happy about all the time she had to spend with us, and rightly so. If she didn't, there was no archivist there. We got an archivist there now, Sharon Wolf, who's fabulous. But at the time, the executive director had to be kind of hovering over us, making sure we weren't stealing stuff, and so it was a full-time job for her, and she had a full-time job beside that. So she would tell us that, you can come here for 5 days and you can come at 10 and you got to leave at 3. And we were just jamming all over the place, trying to get through as much stuff as possible. And I still don't know all the good stuff that's in there. Although that kind of stuff, because they're digitizing it and making it available online, there's a whole bunch of great new information that's coming out of that. But neither Kevin Hanlon and Dan Carosino, when they were researching for their movie, nor Sarah and I, when we were researching for this book, ever got to see all the stuff we wanted to see. There's just, Lord knows what else is there. We don't know what else is there because we didn't get a chance to look at it, and we needed, days and days and days to do that.
Well, thank you, sir. I'm sure everyone will acknowledge that. I do acknowledge that. Lewis, Lewis, you need to put your camera on for this section, unless we know who you are. So I don't think we've met, Lewis. Have we met? I don't think so. Maybe we have. Lewis, thank you for putting on your camera. Yeah, you got it, Lewis. Sorry, I pressed it at the same time as you, Lewis. You're muted. I pressed it at the same time as you.
Okay.
Thank you.
You got me? Okay. Well, Lewis Alcoholic, and I really appreciate these informative meetings. And I was just wondering, does anybody know how Lois felt about the fact that she wasn't asked to write the chapter on Two Wives? That Anne Smith declined, Florence Rankin, I believe you said, declined, and then Bill decided to write the chapter Two Wives. Was that something that Lois resented? Was there any discussion about the possibility of Lois writing the chapter Two Wives? She certainly qualified.
In Lois Remember, she talks about the fact that she was furious over that, and in an interview she did for a book that was written, she was, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years before she died. She told the interviewer that she was still angry about it after all these years. And my comment always is in the background is like, so how's that third step Al-Anon working for you, honey? You know, having a resentment all those, 40, 50 years later. But yeah, she was furious about it. Florence Rankin was given a story in the back of the book, but we're talking about the one in the front, Two Wives, in the front of the book. And I just did a presentation on that a couple of weeks ago. I have not gotten the video back from that to post up online, but I've got a whole presentation on Two Wives that addresses that issue in 4-part harmony. And I'm doing that one for David on the 17th, I think, of April.
Friday, 17th of April. That's right, Bill. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lewis. Did you want to say? Yeah, you're okay? Yeah. Thank you.
If I could jump in.
Yeah. I just
Richard,
wanted,
we come to you after Robert. Robert,
can I just say one comment? You know,
please do,
how
yeah.
Did Bill ever? To me, I identify more with Lois. How Bill had the chutzpah to not have Lois write the chapter, and did he ever shed any light on why he didn't want her to do it and why at the very end he decided to do it? To me, my first thought is like, Bill was known to have a slight ego issue. And they say if that it was only Dr. Bob that started the program, it wouldn't have gotten out of Akron. And if it was only Bill Wilson, they would have been selling franchises to it like McDonald's. So, but did Bill ever explain seriously why he elected not to have Lois write it?
Hey, Lewis, besides that presentation that's going to be up on YouTube soon, there's an entire chapter in my book, chapter 18 on Two Wives, that addresses all those questions you just asked.
Good stuff, guys. Let's go to Robert. Robert J.
Yes, I'm Robert Alcoholic. Bill, when they got that argument, what was that argument about, man, when Bill almost drank?
No idea. We'd love to know that. I mean, yeah, I'd love to know what the argument was about, and I would really love to be a fly on the wall while Hank Parkhurst is talking Bill off the ledge. And then I'd like to be at the meeting the next night to know if he actually owned up to it. That's probably more important than anything else. I think that's a real burning question for me. Did Wilson go public about how thirsty he'd been, or did he just kind of, do the usual reading from the book and his pontificating, as Jimmy Burwell and others said he normally did? Don't know. Love to know, but that's all we got from the diary. I was just
It must have been a good one, man, if he wanted to drink after 3 years of sobriety.
Yeah, well, she obviously pissed them off somehow, really hugely.
Yeah.
So, of course, that's never happened to me, of course, but I've read about it other places. And
Thankfully it didn't.
Okay, thank you. You answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And Richard, you've discovered someone sponsored you to raise your hand. Well done, Richard. Good man.
Yes, thank you, Richard, an alcoholic from Cleveland, Ohio. And I just wanted you all to know, if you make it to Akron for the meeting every year, the Cleveland office has one of the original 100 books that was just recently donated to them, and it's got markings in the margins. There it was Chip Chisholm's book, one of the original 100, and he's got his side notes in there and stuff. And they published 100, sent it around for comments. They were taken back and kind of compiled for the original volume of Alcoholics Anonymous, as I understand it. Anyway, but it's relatively newly on display down in Cleveland.
Richard, I'm confused. Is that is that a pre-publication multilith copy that was marked up, or is that an April 10th, 1939 red book that was marked up?
It's a pre-publication.
Ah, cool. I'd be Jim, we got to get on that one.
Yeah, you could probably call the central office there and just confirm all that. Some of my friends are still working there.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, Richard. That's good.
And I
That's
say
good.
Hendersonville, North Carolina, and I'm over by Winston-Salem right now. Getting ready to go back to Cleveland. Thank you all. Really enjoyed this. I'll be back.
Oh, good to hear that. And just these dates, if you want to just physically see him, this is Bill is with us on April 10th of April, and he's coming back the following week to do Two Wives. And the publication day is April 10th, of course, when the book was published. Bill, I believe you're going to do it on Bill's vision, Bill Wilson's vision, an ever-changing plan, and it's going to be an updated version of that. Am I correct in saying that, Bill?
You are correct. I finally got finished with the first draft. Now I got to go back and make
Man,
sure I believe everything I say there.
Listen, I can't say it enough times. You're a good man. I can't say it enough. Just to let you know, Randy was here, but Randy had to jump up. But Randy is doing a presentation on that day as well, and it's not in conflict with us. But if you want to have a binge on it, Randy is doing on the 87th anniversary of the Big Book of AA, and it's a Zoom event. There you go. The details is meeting ID. I'll put this in the chat if you want to stick around for it as well. And I'm right. Do I have a time there? 6:30 p.m. There you go, Central Time. So I'll put that in the chat. Right, he's doing all the different changes to the Big Book. Bill, I think we have you for about 5 minutes, have we? I think maybe 5 minutes. We have you on Bill for 5. So we have 5 minutes. If you want to use that time, please jump in. If not, we can get ready to close the meeting. Something struck me when I was reading this. It's fascinating. I can't find it now. But if anyone else has got a question, please jump in. I think I missed it. No?
So we're good. I can go to dinner.
Not yet, Bill. No,
Susan just put her hand up.
Susan.
Hi guys. Hi, Susan Alcoholic. I don't have a question. I'm just flabbergasted if Bill, if the multilith copy, 100 multilith copy have just shown up. Wasn't that the original cost for you to start researching that?
Yes, it was. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I find this to be maybe a celebratory moment if it turns out that you just learned about more copies of the multilith. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm always saying, it's not what I wrote's not carved in stone. More will be revealed, and more is getting revealed all the time because people are gotten more and more interested in the story and the details of the story on a granular contemporary document level. And if that's true, there's a contemporary document well worth taking a look at.
And as we know, there's been a Hank Parkhurst Wikipedia page put up since the call in 2019. So, that's going well as well. If you want to get access to more information about Hank Parkhurst. Bill, I think I remember what I was going to, I kind of took a note of it. Floyd Parsons, I know there's a footnote in it about him, but can you just mention something about Floyd Parsons, who, that chap there?
Everything I know about Floyd Parsons is in that footnote.
Right.
I just closed my book, so.
Yeah, we'll go and read that. Okay, I just wanted to get it on tape, but no worries. I can read it myself. So the idea of the book, not to bear the name of any author, but to be by Alcoholics Anonymous. They figured that it may take a year to complete it, and they have offers to have it carefully edited by 2 writers, one of whom is Floyd Parsons. So basically, he's an editor of a newspaper. Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever it says in that footnote, there should be a footnote right there.
Yeah, I don't have it on this. I have to go into the book.
Okay.
No, that's the problem. I don't have it on the copy. Oh, is it there?
Well,
did you
soon, David? We're going to have a new ebook, updated ebook out. But when I say soon, I mean hopefully within 3 or 4 months. So
there you go. So that's going to be a new. And you were telling us about the publisher as well. You own the rights to it or something yourself now.
Yeah, I have the rights to it. I just can't get them to stop selling books.
Right, sorry, and just quickly put this on the tape. I have it here, the footnote. Floyd Parsons was, according to the Palm Beach Post, in a February 4, 1931 story entitled Floyd Parsons Talks at Rotary Gathering. He was a noted writer and reporter, investigator of Saturday Evening Post fame. There you go. I just wanted to get that into my head. Bill, we're going to go back to you. We do really appreciate all that you do for us and have done for us. those of us who like to grow an understanding in this area. Please, I'm going to put up on the screen first. Bill is going to close. Bill, are you doing the evening gather?
Whatever you want, David. Evening Gatha always works for me.
Well, I do like the evening gather very much, Bill. There we go. I just closed that one and I put it up on its own. So Bill is back. He's going to be on April 10th that day. Just to let you know, he's doing the presentation first. And we're back here next week, and we're doing chapter 11 next week, which is, of course, Chasing Testimonials. And we're going into July 1938. So back to Bill Sherborne. Oh, Bill, sorry, I beg your pardon. I've done something wrong here, haven't I? There you go.
Thank you, David. The thing I really like about this particular quote unquote Buddhist prayer is it speaks to me directly. And the message is meant for me directly. So the evening Gatha, a moment of silence, please. Let me respectfully remind you, William, that life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken to the present moment. Take heed. This night your days are diminished by one. Do not squander your single and precious life.
Well, I don't think it's hard when I'm reading this book. It feels like I'm growing. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Bill.
See you all next week.
Bill.
And thank you, Jim.
Thank you,
And
Bill.
everyone.
Thank you,
Bill.
Bill. Thank you, David, for everything.
Great talk. Great talk. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Kit, for your
David.
perseverance. Kit,
the
you should push
readers.
any lengths to get back on. Well done, Kit.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Going to any lengths.
Well done, thanks, Kit. Thanks, George, for climbing the roof.
Yeah, right. He did it. He shook a
Well done,
wire.
George.
Okay.
Thank
take
you.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so
later.
much, David.
Thank you,
Lovely to see
Jeannie.
ya.
I'll just stop the recording here, but we can stick behind for a bit if you want. Stop the. That was just so informative, wasn't it? Really, you just.